Joining me today is Dr. Wayne Lesperance, professor of political science at New England College. Wayne, we've talked about the presidential election, and we're going to have to get you back sort of once the dust settles, but let's talk locally. Sure. I don't know where to begin, and we don't have much time, but let's start with the governor's race. Was that a surprise?
It was a surprise. I think that if the folks that were betting, at least folks I talked to, thought that Senator Ayotte would win and that Chris Sununu would lose, and they thought the reverse of what actually has happened.
Was Ayotte's loss a function of not supporting Trump, do you think?
I don't know. Because when you look at the rest of the ticket, you see that you have Hillary winning. You have Democrats being very successful, with the exception of governor. In terms of the statewide races, the Democrats were very successful. I don't know if we can put this all on that, but I certainly think that was part of it. I also think that Maggie Hassan has a lot of goodwill with a lot of voters, and so I think it wasn't just a vote against Kelly. I think there were a lot of folks that were
a very strong pro-Maggie vote.
Right. I think that's a part of it.
So Sununu.
Right.
What we would have said the underdog.
Sure. Colin Van Osteren had all the advantages you could ever want. He had unqualified support from his party early on. He had raised a ton of money. He had Washington money coming in. He had outside money coming in. You don't tee it up much better than that in an election. His only disadvantage were that he was relatively unknown to folks, and I'm not sure he had the best debate performances. Not that Chris Sununu did better.
Chris Sununu had name recognition, but wasn't overly.
Well, and sometimes name recognition can be a problem, right? Especially in an election where people are saying we're tired of the same old folks. So I think he deserves credit. He ran a good campaign. He kept himself focused. He unapologetically embraced Donald Trump, and even when there was a lot of pressure to distance himself, he stuck with it, and he won. So that's one we're going to be sort of sifting through to try to figure out how that happened. Why
should we have been surprised in that? The House, I think, went overwhelmingly Republican. The Senate is still in the Republican control in New Hampshire and nationally. But given the overwhelming support for Republicans in the House, right? I think they're still controlling it, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Why wouldn't we expect a Republican governor?
I think because we spent a lot of time focusing on the polling data and on the debate performance, and all of that told us that he was going to lose, and probably lose pretty big. UNH had probably, I think it was the last poll before Election Day, and they had him losing by 7 points.
He won by 1 or 2?
He won by 2, I think.
That's a 9-point swing. That's out of the margin of error.
UNH had Hillary Clinton winning by 11 points. And she may have won by 0.7.
Or half a point. I mean, what was it? 1,500 votes. I mean,
it was a fraction. So
300 votes and nothing.
We have to go back and ask ourselves. And it's not unique to UNH, by the way. I'm not picking on them. That we have a polling problem where somehow our polls are not getting to all the voters, or the voters aren't answering honestly. I mean, we sort of started the show talking about this. At the end of the day, we've got to figure out how we can actually measure public opinion, and we're not doing a very good job of it right now.
How will Chris Sununu govern?
I think it's going to be a very traditional governorship. I mean, remember, the New Hampshire governor served 2-year terms, so he's going to almost immediately be making a decision about running again. I think he's a fiscal conservative. I think he's pretty pragmatic at the end of the day. I don't think he's an ideologue. And so I think he, having that executive counselor experience, he'll work well with that group. And they're going to be very pragmatic, particularly around budgetary matters.
So let me ask
having control of the legislature would be a big deal for him. If
we think of the Republican Party as sort of two wings, and it may be more complicated than that, I'll grant.
Sure.
One wing is sort of the pragmatist, do what's right, sort of, get things done, willing to compromise. Another is really sort of very entrenched, very conservative. With what side does Governor Sununu migrate?
I think he would reject the premise of your question and say I have to work with both, and that's probably true. I think as a pragmatic matter, as a businessman, I think he's much more pragmatic.
Will we see a balanced budget, major overturns of any rules?
I don't know. I mean, I think that I think he has all the pieces on the board to really push forward an agenda that will get him to where he wants to be. But there are a lot of pressures on the New Hampshire budget. We're in a pretty good period right now in terms of revenue, so they're gonna have some opportunities there. But there's a lot of big expenses coming, and particularly around healthcare, Medicare, Medicaid, and all of that stuff. So he's got some tough roads ahead of him.
All right, well, Wayne, we're out of time. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for joining us for this edition of Capital Connections, your weekly access to politics and policy along the I-89 and I-91 corridors and how it impacts your life in our region. If you've got an idea or a comment for a future show, why don't you send me an email? But remember, please join us at this same time for another edition of Capital Connections.